All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some good initial conversations, at least to say hello. We'll have a few other opportunities as we go through our time today for you to have some conversation with those in your breakouts. Today, it's my privilege to introduce a good friend and colleague of mine for many years, Dr. Reggie Blount, who serves as the executive director of the Oikos Institute for Social Impact. His presentation today is entitled From Scarcity to Abundance, Congregational Assets and Community Renewal. So today he's going to explore how congregations can both identify and also steward assets in ways that strengthen the well-being of their neighborhood and also support economic renewal. As the church is continually changing, this is a major piece of conversation. And so we're so thankful to hear from you today, Reggie. And so I'm going to turn things over to you. And I think, Reggie, you're going to need to unmute there.
There we go. After doing this for so many years, you would think that we would know how to do the unmuting. But thank you, Thad, for all of your continued support over the years, your friendship over the years, and this now opportunity to be a part of the common table and to share with all of you who have come to hear this presentation today. So let's go ahead and get started. Uh, our focus is again from scarcity to abundance, congregational assets, and community renewal. I hope that you did have some great conversation around our breakout question and hope that you get some greater insights on some of the things that you were able to share during that time. I want to talk about, as we enter into this conversation, what does it mean to see the problem? And I want to use a verse of scripture from 2 Corinthians 20:12 to help us as we delve into this more deeply. And it's from, again, 2 Chronicles 20:12. Our God, will you not judge them? For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. So Jehoshaphat stands before an army he cannot defeat with what he has. He has done the math. The numbers don't work. The strategy is not obvious. The future is not clear. And so Jehoshaphat prays, and his prayer is one of the most honest prayers in all of Scripture, right? We do not know what to do. And what I want you to notice is what Jehoshaphat does not say. He does not say we have nothing. He says, our eyes are on you. And friends, there's something about the reorientation of the eyes that precedes the release of the resources. He looked up before he looked around. And when he looked around with consecrated sight, he discovered that the worship team was the strategy. The singers went first into the battle. Abundance was always there, surrounding him. It was simply waiting for the eyes trained to see it. I wonder if we have been misdiagnosing the challenges faced by many of our congregations. Could it be that many of our congregations are not struggling because they do not have enough? Could it be that they are struggling because they have been trained to see themselves as though they do not have enough? And I believe there is a difference, and it is a big difference. And the condition I'm describing has a name, and I call it traumatized imagination. Scarcity is not just an economic condition, it is a spiritual wound. It is what happens when a congregation lives in a survival mode long enough that the institution's nervous system becomes calibrated to threat rather than possibility. The default question shifts then from what has God given us, right? To what do we not have? And once that shift happens, it ends up shaping everything. How all our boards and ministries meet, how the budget gets built, right? How members are seen, and how the community ends up being engaged. And I want to suggest to you that there are three symptoms of a traumatized imagination. The first symptom is comparison anxiety. Let's sit with that a minute. Comparison anxiety. This is the tendency to measure your congregation's worth, its capacity, and faithfulness against either the church down the street or the mega church with the big budget. Comparison anxiety is spiritually corrosive, y'all, because it relocates your congregation's sense of identity from its God-given calling to someone else's metrics. And when your measure of success is borrowed from another institution, you will always feel behind. The second system is hoarding instincts. And this shows up when congregations protect turf, guard programs, and treat the budget as a survival mechanism rather than a missional instrument. When every new idea is met with, that's not possible, or we can't afford that, or it will take away from what we've been doing for the last 30 years. Even before the idea has even been explored, I want to suggest to you that's a hoarding instinct. It's a hoarding reflex. It's an institution trying to protect what remains rather than deploy what it has. I think it's a difference between feeling the need for sheer preservation to engaging in true faithfulness. And friends, the third symptom is transactional relationships. And friends, this is perhaps the most theologically troubling of the three, because it is the one that more directly distorts our understanding of each other. You see, when members are seen primarily through the lens of their financial giving, or when they are categorized as givers or consumers rather than as partners who carry gifts the congregation has never thought to ask about, I believe we have lost something essential. We have reduced the image of God in each other to a transaction. Now, I want to be clear. Naming these symptoms is not an act of shame. It is an act of clarity. You cannot heal what you cannot see. And the whole point is to help us see more clearly. Jehoshaphat was not ashamed to say, "We do not know what to do." That is not a weakness. That is the beginning of wisdom. It is the precondition for turning your eyes towards something greater than the problem that is in front of you. And so, right after our next breakout, I want to introduce these four capitals to you, and we will go into them in more depth. Intellectual capital, uh, social capital, human capital, and financial capital. Well, let's go into our next breakout.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Reggie. Already, I've been taking feverish notes, so I'm sure that others have as well. So we talked about those three symptoms during this first part of the presentation: comparison anxiety, hoarding instincts, and also transactional relationships. And so, which of those three, this is for everybody as you go into your breakouts, and I'll again pop this in the chat where you can see it, but which of those three do you observe most in your congregation's culture? So, which of those three do you observe in your congregation's culture, and how do these manifest in real situations, such as during meetings, budget discussions, or when new ideas are introduced? So, again, we've talked about those three symptoms: comparison, hoarding, or the transactional relationships. Which one do you observe most in your congregation's culture, and how does that show up? So, we'll have a few minutes in breakouts to discuss, and then we'll be back for more of Reggie's presentation. We've got just about everybody back now. So I am so excited for the continuation of Reggie's presentation. I want you all to know that at the end of his presentation, we're going to have time for Q&A. And so I'd encourage you, even now, to begin thinking about a question you'd like to ask or maybe a comment that you'd like to make. You're welcome to use the raise hand function. You're also welcome to use the chat at any point in time, and we'll reserve some time for us to be in conversation. But so I'm going to turn things back over to Reggie for this next portion of our presentation.
Thanks, Thad. And if you are willing to do so, I would love for you to place in the chat which traumatized imagination did you name for your culture and your congregation? Uh, uh, so please feel free to share that in the chat. Um, so we talked about what might be our challenge, what might be our problem. Let's talk about what we already have. And again, I want to go into those four capitals that I mentioned earlier and want to go into them in a little bit more detail. And let's start with uh, intellectual capital. So, intellectual capital is the accumulated wisdom, the theology, the institutional memory, the liturgical practices, the stories, and the organizational knowledge that your congregation carries. It is what your congregations know how to do. And I want to suggest to you that this is the most undervalued and underdeployed resource that most congregations possess. Think about what it means for a congregation to have been practicing resurrection theology for a century, to have buried its dead and sung them home, and then come back the next Sunday to worship a risen Lord. That congregation knows something about grief, and that congregation knows something about hope and resilience that the broader culture is desperately searching for right now. A trauma-informed therapist would pay real money to understand how that community holds suffering without being consumed by it. Friends, that is intellectual capital. It's transferable knowledge, and it is a gift. Think about what it means for a congregation to have navigated conflict and come through it together, to have survived a building campaign or a pastoral transition or the pandemic. That institution has accumulated wisdom about organizational resilience that business schools write case studies about. Your congregation has lived that case study. And do you remember Jehoshaphat? When the army appeared, his spiritual capital was his worship tradition. He did not call the generals first. He called the singers because in his tradition, praise was not just a feeling, it was a force. The worship team led the army not because it was a beautiful metaphor, but because Jehoshaphat knew from generations of practice that praise was a way of orientating the community toward the God who makes a way where there is no way. That was intellectual capital deployed as strategy. So think about it. What is one thing your congregation knows how to do that you have never formally offered to your community? And feel free to place that in the chat as well. What's one thing that your congregation knows how to do that you have never formally offered to your community? The next is social capital. And social capital is the relational network your congregation holds, who your members know, who trusts them, whose doors are open because of them, whose phone calls they return. It is the web of relationships that your congregation has built, sometimes over generations in a neighborhood and a city. And here's what I want you to understand about social capital. It does not show up on a budget line. It is invisible to most congregational accounting systems. And yet it is often the most powerful resource a congregation possesses. In my work with congregations through the Oikos Institute for Social Impact, and here's my shameless plug, go to oikosinstitute.org and you'll find out more about our organization and what we do. One of the things that we have discovered again and again is that the most significant resources in many neighborhoods are not the large, well-funded institutions. They are the small, trusted congregations, the ones that have been in relationship with families for 30, 40, 50 years, the grandmother who trusts the pastor, the family that comes to the church before they go to any social service agency because they know they will be seen there as people and not as cases. And friends, that trust is not sentimental. It is strategic. It is social capital. And it is enormously valuable. I'll get the word out. So let me ask you a question. If every member of your congregation drew a map of the 5 most influential people they know outside of the building, what would that network look like? How many sectors of your community would be represented? How many city hall relationships, school principal relationships, hospital relationships, foundation relationships would you discover? Have you ever mapped that? Has your lay leadership, your ministry leadership ever seen that map? And who are the other institutions outside your doors who are missionally aligned with the work your congregation is called to do in the community that you could partner with that currently you don't have a relationship with? Social capital is the currency of the kingdom economy, and most congregations have far more of it than they actually realize. So that's social capital. The third capital I want to talk about is human capital. And let me do it by telling a story. Friends, there was a congregation, a faithful, committed congregation that had been worshiping together for decades. They ended up having a leaking roof, and not a more metaphorical leaking roof. It was actually water pouring down. It was coming through the ceiling, and they needed money to fix it. So they did what congregations do. They launched a fundraising campaign. They made ask during the service. They held a fish fry. They prayed over it. 2 years passed, and the roof was still leaking. But here was what was in plain sight. In the third pew on the left every Sunday sat a licensed contractor who had been a member of the congregation for 11 years. In the choir, two retired project managers who between them had overseen more than 40 construction projects. And the program officer of a local foundation that had funded 3 neighborhood capital projects in the past year was there. She came to their community Thanksgiving dinner every year. The roof was the presenting problem, but the real problem was that no one had learned to see. The congregation had been looking so hard for financial capital that it had completely missed the human capital sitting right in front of it. Friends, human capital is the skills, the expertise, the professional experience, and the life wisdom that our members carry. A congregation is not a collection of donors. It is a community of practitioners. I think I feel the need to say that again. A congregation is not a collection of donors. It is a community of practitioners. And when we see members only through the lens of their financial giving, we miss most of what they bring. So take a minute to think about one member whose professional skills has never been deployed in your congregation's mission. What field are they in? What is the gift that they could offer if only we took time to acknowledge it, honor it, and ask for it to be leveraged for the mission that God has called the congregation to. And the last capital that I want to mention is financial capital. And I'm naming it last for a reason. Because I want to name clearly, I'm not saying financial resources don't matter. They do. This capital is real, and for many congregations, and the lack of it is a genuine and pressing challenge that cannot be minimized or spiritualized away. But I kept it for last because when it comes first, it tends to crowd out everything else. It ends up taking up much more room than probably it should. It creates the illusion that financial poverty is the same as resource poverty. Did you catch that? You end up equating financial poverty with resource poverty, and those two things are not the same. Even within this capital, the reframing matters. Many congregations are sitting on underutilized property that could become a co-working space for neighborhood entrepreneurs, a site for small business incubator, a home for a nonprofit serving a population the congregation already cares about. The property is not a liability waiting to drain our resources or our reserves. It is an unrealized blessing waiting for consecrated imagination. And many congregations have relationships with local foundations, CDFIs, and community development institutions that they have never fully explored because they did not see themselves as the kind of organizations those institutions fund. And so I want to tell you, you may be exactly the kind of organization they're looking for. The trust your congregation holds in a neighborhood, the relationships you have built over the decades, the track record you have shown, you have shown by showing up for others. That is precisely what funders cannot buy and cannot manufacture. You already have it. As a matter of fact, dare I say, you don't have to go go into meetings with funders hat in hand. You can go in declaring you offer value, that you have social capital that they desire to be able to make a difference. That's a different framing and a different understanding and a different lens for which we might think about approaching our work. And so again, and this, I too want to ask that you consider placing in the chat. Which of the four capitals does your congregation most underutilize? Which of the four capitals does your congregation most underutilize? In the work of Oikos, we call our work fishing differently. And let me tell you a little story about fishing differently, one that you know very well. You know, Luke tells us that Peter had been fishing all night. He was not inexperienced. He was not undisciplined or lazy. He was a professional fisherman. He knew the water. He had the tools. He had done everything right. And he had caught nothing that day, that evening. He was exhausted. He was washing his nets. He was done. And here comes Jesus saying to him, "Go and cast the net on the other side of the boat." Here you got a carpenter telling a fisherman to go out again and fish on the other side of the boat. But what's interesting, Peter was asked to fish on the other side, not further out, not with better equipment, not after a course on advanced fishing techniques. He was asked to fish on the other side, using the same boat, the same water, the same nets, but from a different angle. And the catch was so great, they could not haul it in. And friends, I want to suggest to you that this is precisely the situation many of our congregations are in. The resources are not further away. They are not hidden behind a locked door that requires a key you do not have. They are adjacent to where you already are. They are on the other side of the boat. What is required is not more effort in the same direction. What is required is the willingness to try a different angle. And that willingness is, again, what Oikos Institute calls fishing differently. Financial capital, intellectual capital, social capital, and human capital. So what does fishing differently actually look like in practice? And so I want to give you four concrete practices to consider. And these are not programs, these are postures, habits of seeing and engaging that, if cultivated, will change the way your congregation experiences its own life and its relationship to the community around it. And the first practice is asset mapping rather than needs assessment. You see, most congregations begin their planning process by cataloging what they lack. And so I want to invite you to flip that script. Begin with a rigorous and intentional inventory of what is already present. Map the people, map the relationships, map the property, the stories, the skills, and the institutional trust that exists right now. The community organizing tradition has known this for decades. When we start with assets, you discover that you have more leverage than you thought. When you start with needs, you rehearse your own inadequacy before you have even begun. So start with, what is it that is already in our hands? And the second practice is neighbor listening. You cannot see abundance in your community if you only talk to the people you already agree with, who you already know, or who already knows your institution, who already shows up on Sunday. Friends, but abundance is often hidden in the question that someone else is carrying. Structured, Intentional one-on-one relationship meetings with neighbors, community members, local leaders, and even unlikely allies will surface needs, gifts, and opportunities that no amount of internal planning will ever reveal. Your next major partnership is probably already sitting across the street. You just have not had the conversation yet. And so neighborhood listening is important. And the third practice that I want to suggest to you is cross-sector partnership. Kind of gets back to connecting with that partner that might be right across the street. Because the reality is no congregation has all four capitals in abundance at the same time. But a congregation partnered with a neighborhood school, a local business, a health clinic, and a community organization together almost certainly does. The vocation of the congregation in the 21st century is not self-sufficiency. It is faithful collaboration. Here again, I feel the need to repeat this again. The vocation of the congregation is in the 21st century is not self-sufficiently, is not ministry in silo. It is faithful collaboration. Remember that Jehoshaphat consulted the people before he moved the army. He did not strategize alone. Abundance in the kingdom economy is almost always a communal discovery. And here's the last practice that I would offer to you. Gratitude as strategy. Friends, gratitude is not just a feeling. It is a practice. It is a practice that literally retrains a community's attentional system. When a congregation develops a regular rhythm of naming, celebrating, and publicizing what God has already done, what the members have contributed, what the neighbors have shown up to do, what unexpected doors have opened. Friends, it reshapes how the whole community reads its own situation. It could be testimony Sundays. It could be storytelling in your ministry meetings. Instead of jumping straight into the business, can we start with storytelling? Abundance reports rather than deficit reports. These are not just morale boosters, they are formative practices. And I want to say to you that they teach a community how to see. So for the next 30 days, over the next 30 days, let me offer you a challenge. Within the next 30 days, I want you to convene one conversation in your congregation, not a board meeting with a full agenda, just one focused conversation. And I want to suggest to you to begin not with the budget, not with the building, not with attendance numbers, but this one question. What has God already given us that we have not yet fully offered back? What has God already given us that we have not yet fully offered back? Thad, do we have a time for next breakout?
All right. Thank you very much, Reggie. I think there's enough energy right now to just go straight into the Q&A. And so we'll turn in that direction. But before we do, I want to invite each of you to simply consider the question that Reggie has proposed as a next step. So to convene one conversation. So if we are to convene one conversation, who's that with? Who needs to be at that table to convene the conversation that Reggie has just mentioned. Just jot that person's name or maybe that group's name, but who is it in the next 30 days that you could convene? Just take a second to process that and we'll jump into the Q&A. All right, so let's dive in. And again, if anybody does have a comment or a question, we invite you to either pop it in the chat. You're also welcome to utilize the raise hand feature as well. Either way, we'd be more than happy to chat with you. I'm going to launch out in a couple of just different directions that I think are pretty critical. You shared the story to start of Jehoshaphat, and in particular, that it was a vision problem. I mean, what I'm taking away here, Reggie, is that we don't actually have a resource problem. We have a failure of an imagination and a failure of faith. And as I started thinking about, like, just throughout scripture, whether it be, I don't know, Peter, who's walking on water and diverts his eyes to the storm, whether it be the Israelites that are walking in the wilderness and they, turn their eyes away from the manna that they have right before them, or the spies that go out and consider, should we go into the promised land or not? And oh no, the giants are too big. David, who looks right in front of him and finds just a few river stones, right? That this is a constant theme throughout all of scripture. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is this is more than just like, a strategy for a congregation. This is kind of like the components of what the people of God have been wrestling with since its inception. I mean, so I'd be curious what your thoughts are. I mean, how expansive is what you're talking about here?
So thanks for lifting that up and making the connections how this has happened all through the stories that we experience in the Bible. What this does, it reminds us truly that we are not God and that all of this comes with just being human. The Oikos Institute works with congregations primarily who are serving under-resourced areas. And uh, and what we have learned in our work with these congregations who are doing well-meaning work, trying to be, best faithful disciples of Christ in their communities and doing great work. But when you only see your work through uh, the lack of resources you feel that you have, that lead, and you find yourself then in what is survival mode. Survival mode then leads to scarcity thinking. And when scarcity thinking has sunk in, it robs a community, a person, a community of imagination. And all you can then see is what you don't have. Um, the other challenge is when you only can focus on what you don't have, you then forget who God is. Because what it ends up doing is it also creates a scarcity theology. If I have lack, clearly God must have lack as well. And we lose sight of the fact that we say that we serve a God of abundance,
That's strong.
that all things belong to God, that God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills. We end up forgetting all of that. And then we only can see what we have come to allow ourselves um, to see as scarcity. Dare I say this? And I may run into some theological challenges and struggle with some folk. But when I pastored for 27 years, and what I would always say to my congregation, that the only power that the enemy has is distraction, and scarcity is a distraction of God, from God.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like the idol worship, right? Where we
Yes,
take something else and we think, from whence cometh my help? From from the almighty
that's
dollar or anything
that's
else.
right.
I noticed that there's a question in the chat from Phil Jameson. I know his camera's not working, but Phil, I wonder if you could come off mute, ask your question. But I'm also going to, in the spirit of kind of seeing who's before you and the gifts that are in the room, Phil's done a lot of thinking on just theology and money. And so before you ask your question, Phil, I'd be curious from your perspective. We've got these, different endowments or areas, the intellectual capital, social capital, human capital, financial capital, and yet we often focus on the financial. What's the power behind the financial that oftentimes leads us to think of that one first? So if you could, Phil, maybe answer my question and then ask yours.
Well, Reggie already said it so well. Is once the conversation turns to money, nothing else seems to ever come back. And again, that illustrates just the power of money in our culture. That we almost give it a divine status. It is. Remember, Jesus did say that you can't serve two masters, and the money possessions is the the example he uses, and he's of course using that he's speaking to very poor people when he says that. So if for them that's the temptation, how much more for us? So I mean, I think like he said, it's money's power tends to again rob us of vision. Yeah. My question gets at just something I've observed in the work I've done is the deep, profound connection between gratitude and generosity. That and there's a funny sense in which it doesn't really matter which one you begin with; it always tends to go to the other. A generous people becomes a grateful people. So sometimes you have to kind of prime the pump. Now, I don't you want to be careful with that because it's not a matter of you got to give in order to get. I don't mean that,
Hmm. Hmm.
but in the act of giving, it does seem that there's an openness to being grateful for what one has as one is giving away. The hoarding, of course, makes it always seem smaller. The giving seems to increase one's vision. The other side, though, is once one realizes how much one has, it's not that hard to start giving. So, Reggie, I guess I'm just asking, have you seen the same connection over the course of your work? And this was great. I hope everyone has enjoyed this as much as I have. This has been a wonderful presentation.
Thanks so much, Phil. And the answer is yes. And again, I think you said it quite well. Um, Generosity and gratitude go hand in hand. I think there's a scripture that says something that God loves a cheerful giver. Uh, and I think that what's tied to that is God loves a gracious and grateful giver. Um, and gratitude comes out of taking um, an assessment of how we have been blessed. Uh, I don't know what, I think I reached an age where I keep remembering all these hymns and songs and all of that of our youth. Count your many blessings, name them one by one. And when we start counting our blessings, it creates gratitude. And when you come and when you have that sense of gratitude, then you also, in counting those blessings, see the abundance that you have. It's it's very similar, as to what we've been talking about asset mapping, right? Blessings are a part of the asset mapping. And when we're able to name those things, then it's very easy to be able to then move to a willingness to share, because somehow or another we begin to realize that the well doesn't run dry. that with abundance, the well doesn't dry up, that it will keep pouring back into us even as we pour back out.
That's strong. That really is. I want to name that we are at the hour. However, Reggie has some additional time. And so if you do have a few moments to stick around, I would love for you all to continue in conversation with us. I know I've got a few more questions, and maybe you all do too. I'm going to pop into the chat our upcoming gathering page just in case you do have to head out before too long. Our next conversation will be September 10th, where we're looking at beyond bivocational ministry, so reimagining co-vocational relationships, which in a way is thinking creatively, kind of from this asset mindset about under-resourced congregations and how we can think through leadership kind of pieces. So we'll be hearing some folks across Canada, as well as a journalist and also UCC minister who's done a lot of thinking on this topic. So if you're able to come, feel free to do that. All right, so you just mentioned, Reggie, about this hymn, great hymn of the church, Count Your Blessings, name them one by one. You've encouraged us to map out the intellectual, social, human, and financial capital. Make that plain for us. Is that a complex exercise? Like how does a person in the pew or in the pulpit do it?
I don't think that it has to be a complex exercise. It could be a wonderful, beautiful brainstorming exercise. Kind of back to the question that I've asked folk to to go back and ask, and simply, what is it that God has provided to us that we have not deployed, we have not engaged yet fully. Um, and so when we think about all of these various capitals, it's asking, allowing the congregation to engage in a brainstorming uh, session without judgment, without feeling to qualify. Just begin to name and list, and then begin to ask. So now, what do we now do with what we know that we now have? Again, when you're fixated on lack, you very rarely start thinking about what I have available. The attention and the energy is for the most part focused on how do we overcome this lack, or woe is me because we have this lack. But to take the time, begin naming, I think what it also does, it allows imagination to really start emerging in phenomenal ways. When we start seeing, I mean, and when I'm thinking about the brainstorming, I mean, really somebody, at newsprint, writing some of this down. And when we begin to actually see, oh, we really do have those things, imagination begins to happen about what's possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it strikes me that the very exercise that you encouraged us to do just now, where we named one conversation, right? Like
Yeah.
that is in a sense a mapping. It's as simple as
Yeah,
just
that's
listing
right.
out what we have. So
That's right.
that's a wonderful encouragement. I noticed that Kevin Kennedy, you've got a comment in the chat. Would you like to come off mute and just speak to that briefly? You're talking about learning from other churches, not just on the comparison side.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, not a question, but maybe this is more indicative of Roman Catholic tradition. It's not universally true, but there is a strong sentiment sometimes that we don't have anything to learn. We've got it all. And I think with that mentality, we are missing out on how the Holy Spirit is doing so many great things in other denominations, and we have a lot to learn. Maybe not on the level of theology. I'm not, yes, we do have something to learn on that level too, but I'm talking about just, pastoral practice mainly. That's where we can start. And then maybe
Yeah.
later on we can have more conversations about theology. But I think we need to start there at that very grassroots level of what's working well for you. Let me tell you about what's working well for us. And but I don't know what it is that sometimes we're just not willing to have those conversations. But again, it might be just us, or more prevalent among us as Catholics.
I'd say it's a common thing, but Reggie, what response might you?
You know, as you were sharing that, uh, it has been challenging throughout the centuries for denominations, uh, faith communities of different theological perspectives to find ways to learn from one another. But I would truly bet, and I'm not a betting man, but I would bet if we focused our conversations about what does it mean to really live out Jesus's command to love neighbor, that we all could learn something from one another about how do we go about loving neighbor, and then begin to think about we may be at different places on the theological spectrum, but we all have a call to love neighbor. How can we find ways to do that together? And let that be the centerpiece of the conversation.
Wise words that a rabbi once said, for sure. Reverend Kinney, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, sure, I'm gonna give a shout out to my former professor
Great to see you, Reverend
and
Kenny.
AME colleague. Great presentation, Doc. I guess I would offer, and I know you've talked about imagination at our previous annual conferences. And I don't know if we need a refresh, because as pastors, of course, we want to encourage our congregations, but I feel like our clergy, at least from an AME context, really needs to have a whole rebranding focus around scarcity mindset. Because as you well know, it's annual conference time, and that's just something from now through October 1st that everyone's going to be talking about. So getting people to use these pillars, or how do you share this presentation amongst the fourth district or wherever, right? But I think it's important that hopefully you're reaching as many people as you can. And I certainly wish more of my AME colleagues were here. They're not. But nonetheless, that's my comment. And as usual, thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you, Reverend Kenny, and thank you for sharing what you shared, because it raises a point that I probably should have said at the end and I didn't. So I apologize for this. What I've just offered today will not change a church in a workshop. What I offer today, particularly for folk who find themselves in this cognitive dissonance between scarcity and abundance, we're talking about making culture shift. And anybody who knows anything about organizational development, a culture shift of an institution takes a while. And so the work that I've asked of us to do has to be ongoing. It has to be something that is intentional over a period of time. I can share with you about imagination in a workshop, but then you have to go out and practice imagination. You have to go out and practice the use of intellectual capital. You got to go out and practice the use of social capital. It will not change the culture overnight. It has to be work that is intentional. Thanks for that, Reverend Kenny.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right. Well, we got one. I'm going to ask you one other question before we close. So you talked about mapping, listening, cross-sector partnership, and gratitude. And I'd connect that gratitude piece kind of back to what Phil was saying, and what you've even indicated from the exegetical work that you've invited us to think about is gratitude is part of worship, that this is kind of the core. But I actually want to focus on the cross-sector piece. And this is something that an organization that I provide some leadership for has been kind of thinking about, because we've been thinking about how do we make partners, and it, are we doing it just for convenience sake, or is there actually something more beyond just the convenience? So talk to us about how do we look for the right type of cross-sector partnerships? And in particular, they might not have the same mission, but do they need the same underlying purpose of some sort? Does there need to be some level of congruence? Help us to have an imagination for those cross-sector partnerships. What do we look for?
Yeah. So I would say it starts first with discernment. What is it that the congregation feels that God is calling it to be and to do and to offer and to contribute? What is a congregation's why? If I could sneak in Simon Sinek a little bit. You know, does the congregation understand its why? Spend time with that why. When you're clear about your why, then um, I think that purpose and mission can be a bit synonymous, because then you're looking for partners who also are striving to achieve, to engage in that same why. And then particularly if that why is a why that is a call to reach out to meet the human needs of the community that you serve.
Hmm.
So say that that you've been gifted, the community has been gifted to address issues related to food insecurity. Then there is probably a partner outside your doors who is also committed to the work of food insecurity.
Hmm.
How do you join together on that mission, on that work? They may or may not necessarily agree with you theologically, but as long as they're not, way, way, way off into some other area that you just can't connect with, the mission is, how do we feed people? And so how do you join together with those partners who are as committed as you are in making sure that nobody goes hungry?
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for not only your presentation, but also your wisdom, and even calling us to be reflective on the Holy Scriptures, as well as just discernment, and to think of the congregation's vocation as not just being something of maintenance, but actually to discover how it might be a blessing to its community and world. So, all right. Well, again, thank you all so much for being with us today. And as I mentioned earlier, I've popped into the chat the upcoming gatherings link. I hope that you'll join us. We've got a few that are coming up. And I want to just put in one final plug. And that is that we very soon will be putting out our call for proposals for our in-person global gathering that will be held in April of 2027. This will be an opportunity for conversations just like this one, but across a lot of different areas, and actually in person where we can go deeper. So I would encourage you to kind of keep your eyes open for that call for proposals here in the next week or two. Would love to hear from you all, whether you're coming from a scholarly background and want to talk about some research, or maybe you're on the ground doing some work and you found something that works, or that you've got some creative ideas. We would love to find ways that we can highlight those, and to bring more awareness to what God's doing in our midst. So again, thank you all so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month.